Afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Kiana Simmons. I work with the Green Municipal Fund's Capacity Development Team. I'm joined here today by my colleague Sharon Levitsky, who is in the French channel doing the recording, but we're both available today to help if you have any tech issues. This panel discussion today will be on electrifying municipal fleets. It's sort of replacing our typical GMF webinar that we host the third Thursday of every month. But the webinars that we host usually focus on GMF programs. So we have a panel discussion today. And before we jump into that, I just want to go through some housekeeping items. At today's panel, we do have simultaneous interpretation available for participants who would like to listen in French. So our speakers will be speaking clearly and slowly and doing our best to make sure our interpreter can do her job. She's awesome. So wanted to thank Juliette just at the beginning for joining us once again. Pour les écouteurs en français, aujourd'hui nous avons des panélistes qui vont parler en anglais. Donc, si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe et sélectionnez français. So today's panel will be facilitated by our partners from Clean Air Partnership. Many of you have already submitted questions, and they have done a beautiful job of packaging those and putting together questions that our panelists have reviewed. For any additional questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. If you can see on the screen there, it's that's what the Q&A box looks like, and you should be able to find it at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat box today. I'd invite you now, if you'd like to share where you're joining from, to just say a quick hello, let us know maybe which municipality you're joining from, or what part of the country, or what sort of area you work in. You can also use the chat box to share resources that you may think are relevant, to communicate with other participants, or to let Sharon or I know if you're having any technical difficulties. And just before I pass it over to our hosts, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Long before today, there have long been first peoples on this land, stewarding what we now know as Canada. So we would like to recognize the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples as the traditional custodians of the land on which FCM's offices are located, as well as where my home office is located here today. Now, I would like to introduce you to our host, Desislava Stefanova, Outreach Manager at the Clean Air Partnership. She will be leading the Q&A session today. She's supported by her colleague, Givenchy Kugadia, and I will pass it over to Desi to introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Kiana and the FCM team. As mentioned, we're from Clean Air Partnership as a charity that works to transform cities into more sustainable, resilient, and vibrant communities. So our guest panelist today, Adam Smith, is the Manager of Asset Lifecycle and Manufacturing for Fleet Inventory in Operational Services at the City of Calgary. Adam is responsible for the several core fleet functions, including businesses and new technology management, technology transition, acquisitions, complete lifecycle management of more than 4,000 vehicles and equipment. He has sought innovative fleet opportunities that push boundaries within a municipal fleet, including the Flex Fleet Car Share Program and modernization of operator training. Adam Vaya. Adam advises at the Office of Climate Change and Energy Management at the region of Peel on greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy, zero carbon buildings, and fleet electrification. He has been working with electric vehicle charging stations since 2014 and led the development of the region of Peel's EV charging station management policy and standard. He's currently advising on electric accessible transit buses and refuse trucks projects, and he drives a Nissan Leaf. Our other panelist is Emily Willoughby, is the Senior Manager, Engineering Services in the District of West Vancouver's Engineering Department. In this role, she oversees a variety of functions, including fleet, solid waste collection, and community education programming. She has project managed a wide variety of sustainability initiatives in areas of waste reduction, water conservation, and transportation, including her team's recent work to advance the electrification of the district's municipal fleet. Kevin Butler is the manager of community energy with the Halifax Regional Municipality. Kevin is responsible for the successful delivery of the Solar City program, a new retrofit pilot program, and the municipal electric vehicle strategy. In addition, Kevin is the technical expert supporting the implementation of Hali Act, the municipality's climate action plan that aims to reduce community-wide emissions and achieve net zero by 2050. Thank you very much for being with us today, to all of our panelists. And as Kiana mentioned, we did collect a lot of questions during our registration period, so I want to just start directly to the point. And our first question is for everyone, and that is, what advice would you give to a municipality that is starting out now their fleet electrification journey? Emily, would you like to start this?
Sure. Put me in the hot seat. Thanks, Desi. District of West Vancouver is a community of about 44,000 people. Our fleet is about 200 vehicles. So I think the advice that I would give from a municipality just generally, but also one of our size, is that the vehicles themselves are really important, but they are also just the tip of an iceberg. So the district bought its first full electric vehicle in 2015, and then 2 plug-in hybrids. And what we found is that charging rapidly becomes a pinch point. In addition to the higher capital vehicle costs, each new plug-in vehicle came with a whole different conversation about how we were going to supply charging for that vehicle. And the District of West Vancouver cannot be the only municipal government with facilities that are 40 and 50 years old, with 40 and 50-year-old electrical systems. So that's really what our project was about, was to tackle that charging planning piece so we could capitalize on opportunistic purchase of electric vehicles to transition our fleet forward. And so that would be my advice, is to not get carried away with vehicle purchases without really understanding what the charging requirements for those vehicles are and what the operational realities will be, to make sure that you can really take advantage of those vehicles once they come into your fleet.
Thanks, Emily. Very good points. I'm going to move geographically. So from West Vancouver to City of Calgary, Adam Smith. Oh, we don't hear you right now. Maybe we'll come back to you. Is that okay, Adam? Yeah, Adam Vaya.
Thanks, Desi. Great to see such a well-attended webinar. This is awesome. Just looking at all the names and where people are attending from. This is great. So yeah, I gave this some thought, I'll be honest with you, about 10 minutes before, but hopefully I can shed some light on what advice I would give. I would say fleet electrification is probably more of a change management challenge than a technology challenge, although it is a challenge when having all those different technologies working together. But like at the region, we work on an ADKAR model for change management, which is awareness. Then you get people's desire to want to make the change, give them the knowledge on it, and then give them the ability, and then reinforce. But like fleet electrification touches so many municipal stakeholders, from finance to facilities to fleet, obviously, energy managers, the climate change folks, lots of project managers. So there's a need to really gauge on where people are at in understanding why are we making this move towards electrifying the fleet, building that desire, giving them the knowledge they need and the ability to do so. My second piece of advice is to really start small but plan big. Like on the onset, pilot the chargers, pilot the vehicles, and pilot the software that's going to manage the interaction between those two. Just that experiential learning is so important early on at this stage before you start bringing in a lot of electric vehicles. And then when I'm talking about planning big, Like you really need to get fleet electrification into your long-term capital planning and budgeting cycle. So those dollar figures can be allocated for that type of investment down the road. You need to get a feel for what technologies, when you're going to put them in and how much that's going to cost. So I would say like understanding your fleet replacement cycle, as well as when commercially viable EVs might get introduced, is very important. You know, what are their duty cycles, their routes, their ranges? When will they have an opportunity to charge? And then you need to try and determine, my battery's running low on the laptop here. Let me give it a quick plug in before I run out. You need to really like determine and optimize the charging requirements and determine where there are capacity constraints. So talk to your electric utility early on in the process, and then start planting the seed around the organization, because the stuff like microgrids, your on-site renewable generation, your batteries, all those are going to be advantageous technologies to explore throughout this journey.
Thanks, Adam. Great points raised here. Adam Smith, would you like to try now?
I'll try now. How's that?
It's good.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I caught most of what Adam was saying and certainly what Emily said, and I can echo every single thing they said. We have old facilities. We have an aging grid. We have all of that. And I would say that, you know, be realistic with your planning. You can get creative with solutions, but you have to have a clear intent on what you're trying to do. And you have to know what types of technologies you're willing to bring in, what's realistic for your municipality. And you have to really understand the limitations of some of these things as how it relates to your specific operation. We had to do that. Charging infrastructure is the biggest roadblock for us as well. And it will continue to be that way for the next 4 years or the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Adam. Kevin?
Yeah, so somewhat echoing Adam Vea's comments on change management. So I think the biggest, like the first thing that one should start is to engage the operators of the vehicles. We've got about 550 light duty vehicles in HRM. And whether or not council, you know, has a mandate for us to transition, or there's money involved, if the operators are not comfortable driving the vehicles, and you know, there's education pieces that are required to help that out, it's not going to be successful. So that's something that we're focusing on now. We are lucky enough to have a climate action tax that got us some funding, so we can fund our complete transition to fully electric chargers as well. But it is the piece with the operators and educating them. So I would recommend finding champions within the organization, but also outside of the organization as well. We're working with a nonprofit, the Clean Foundation, that runs the Next Ride program, to engage them to educate the operators and, you know, offer them test drives early on in the process, so that, you know, when vehicles show up, it's not a complete shock.
Great points. Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to circle it back to Emily, and we kind of like touch base on this question, which is the next one. But will utility powered grids be able to meet the needs of increasingly electric vehicles, and how to maintain a clean energy supply with increased EV demand?
Sure. I think this is a fantastic question. I think it's one that sort of underlies a lot of this work, not just at municipalities, but at the provincial and even federal level. In British Columbia, our utility is primarily powered by hydro. We work with hydro. In fact, my colleagues across BC have created an EV peer network for folks who are doing this type of electric fleet and vehicle electrification planning work, which includes representation from power utility planners, because we have those questions. And we want to hear from them how they are managing the long range planning for power supply. But I'm not really in a position to speak about their work in detail. So that's a large scale power utility planning. Those details are better supplied by folks who work for the power utilities who are doing that work. I'm happy to comment on what West Vancouver has done for our municipal sites, which is on a much smaller scale than province-wide power planning. But what we've really done is to start with electrical capacity assessments of our key facilities that house electric fleet vehicles. So we looked at how much power we have to those sites, how much of that power is surplus, and how much charging that available power might potentially supply, but also where can we access it and what will it take to put it in a location where fleet vehicles can charge, where we can install charging stations. So that was a huge piece of work that we did. For our project, we did not have to do a site power upgrade yet, but I would echo, I'm not sure which of the panelists said to work with the power utilities early. Work with the power utilities early, and the longer range plan that you're able to provide the power utility, the more they can integrate that into their long range planning for the municipal grid, and ensure that enough power is moving in the area of your operations facilities or municipal halls that need to support these vehicles.
Thanks, Emily. And yes, we did cover a little bit on the case study about the upgrades of the facility, but it wasn't a power grid. I would invite other panelists if they have something else to add. Yeah,
I think add two things to that. One that's more realistic than the other. This, semi-realistic but very ambitious. I suspect that a lot of the calls here are from municipalities or towns that may potentially have a climate action plan that they're currently implementing. So EVs and transitioning to the to fully electric is one part of a full holistic plan. But if it is coupled wisely with deep energy retrofits throughout the community as well, there is an opportunity to actually keep that electricity demand across the region semi-stable, even if we are electrifying the fleet. So we did an analysis for HRM, and if we actually meet our deep energy retrofit goals with our community, the energy requirement, even if we were to transition to fully electric, actually would not be a significant challenge. In the short term, and potentially more realistic to achieve, all fleet chargers should, depending on how big your fleet is, have demand management systems incorporated within it, so that you can keep your capacity need very low. So for folks that might not be familiar with what that is, let's say you've got 40 vehicles that are charging at the fleet depot. Depending on the operational needs, most of them are probably back at 5 o'clock. You do not need full capacity for each of those vehicles if they're going to trickle charge essentially overnight. So you can shift, you can program them to shift the demand, and Nova Scotia Power is actually piloting an EV charging pilot where they do shift your demand. You get home after work, you plug in, they control your charger, and they charge you up at 3 in the morning when the peak is low. So I think demand side management is important.
Thanks, Kevin. I don't know if Adams want to add something, but if not, we can jump to a bit more a direct question here to Adam Vayan. What are some vehicle telematics softwares that fleet managers use that integrate with charging station management system?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the best response at this time, so feel free to chime in when I'm done, teammates. But I've actually been researching this over the past month, talking to a lot of different EV charging software providers that are market leaders. Geotab appears to keep coming up in these conversations as one of the key ones that have been integrated with a variety of different software platforms, like your EV Connect, your Greenlots or Shell Recharge Now integrates them, but they use a white label, I believe. There's a few others as well. I've also seen Fleet Karma come up as well as another telematics provider. I will say, like, I've talked about these integrations with other ones that haven't done them yet, because we use like Trapeze and CAT AVL for our telematics, and all of them say they can do it, but since it hasn't been done yet, the first one to do it with that platform is going to pay for it. And I've seen it get well into the 5 figures for some of those integrations that are complex. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our fleet managers, when conversing with them, like, they are looking for that hands-off dynamic charging solution where it's not a manual input of a schedule into a platform, it can liaise with telematics as well as that scheduling and say, I know this vehicle is coming back here and I know it needs this state of charge to get out at this time. We're going to do that in the most optimized and efficient way possible to keep the bills low, but keep the reliability there. And if we can get to that point with the telematics, that would be exceptional, as well as in the integration. If it knows when a vehicle is running behind schedule, it knows the location of where it is. It's coming back to the depot late. Okay, how do we prioritize that vehicle? Tell the driver it needs to go to this high power charger for this duration to ensure that car can get, or that truck can get back out on the road at the right time. I have been thinking a lot and talking with providers about other integrations from our independent electricity system operator. Like, can we take greenhouse gas emissions real time of the grid? Can we take real time costs of electricity as well? I have some aspirations around that. So happy to get into that in the Q&A a little later. But at this point, I see Geotab being a leader in the telematics space that's integrated with chargers. At the end of the day is what screen does a fleet manager want to look at? Maybe it's not the EV charging software. Maybe it is a more of a telematic solution that's out there, and the EV charging software is the one that feeds up into that.
Right, thanks. We're gonna jump to the next question, which I guess Kevin and Adam, you have experience in this area. What are the advantages and disadvantages of electrifying emergency fleet vehicles, and how can municipalities start exploring these options? Kevin?
Yeah, for sure. So to start, the advantages, you know, a lot of these emergency vehicles idle a ton. So you're losing, you know, there's quite a bit of emissions for vehicles that are idling. So transitioning to electric is going to, you know, result in significant fuel savings. Also electric vehicles, as some, you know, might know, low center of gravity, you know, really great torque. So they're handled a lot better. The handling is much better. And they get up to, you know, speeds that they may need to get up to a lot faster than the standard internal combustion vehicle. I guess when it comes to disadvantages, there's, I guess the key one is their emergency vehicles. So they need to always be ready to go, you know, when they need to be ready to go. So the charging and making sure that they have a full charge can be a barrier. We've done a bit of investigatory work on electric fire trucks, and there are some models that can handle a traditional urban need. I would suggest that potentially in rural, there might not be, you know, an option. There may be a need for redundancy, you know, have a potential fast charger with a gas diesel generator, diesel generator backup for times of emergencies, or just, you know, have your diesel vehicle that is, you know, on the sidelines when you need to kick in with it.
Thanks. I don't know, Adam Vaya, would you like to chime in here to add something?
Yeah, that was great. I agree with everything you were saying, Kevin, and I didn't even jot down the acknowledgement that these vehicles idle a lot as well. So that's an important one to take into consideration. I see we had David Mitchell in the chat as well, saying home of the first Tesla EV police patrol car, which is awesome. Just acknowledge that. So our police are piloting some Mach-E's right now, but they're not in patrol. But we recently completed an assessment trying to figure out what do we need for charging infrastructure across all of our fleet facilities. Ambulances and police cars were included in that. Ambulances, they had 8 hours, so we can charge them. It wasn't really disadvantage there. But police cars are 24/7 and they're critical. They always got to be ready to go. So the amount of fast charging that was specified at those sites in order to maintain existing operations was scary, and it resulted in like 4 megawatts of demand for this facility, which is pretty outlandish. So one, we're going to need a service upgrade and talk to the utilities. There's 18 months before we even have the power at the place to get the chargers in. But two, the capital cost was just exorbitant. Like there's no return on investment to electrify cars if you're expecting that kind of fast charging infrastructure. That being said, though, it made us look at differently about potentially and when I say us, I mean me shooting the director a PowerPoint with a back of the napkin analysis, but just said, what if you had more power or you had more cars? Parking is always a constraint at our sites, but if you could increase the fleet by a third and give them the ability to charge 8 hours and keep them in a rotation, it was a lot cheaper than installing all that fast charging infrastructure. Another thing that came out of that I was thinking about is Geotab, I think, published a study saying if you fast charge your light duty vehicle 3 times a month, you're going to degrade the battery faster than normal using level 2. These were charging up like twice a day on fast chargers. So while we didn't think the technology was commercially viable yet for police pursuit vehicles, I know like some of the higher end cars are moving to 800 volt platforms, allowing for quicker charging. What that does for battery degradation, I couldn't tell you at this time, but it is something to keep in mind because the battery is the most expensive part of the car and you want to make sure that it's operating for as long as possible at a high performance, especially in critical service vehicles.
I think I would just reiterate that vehicle redundancy was the piece. We looked at that as well in our fleet charging study. Was what do we have? What do we use for emergency, but also for emergency weather events? Snow clearing vehicles do not get a break when there's an ongoing snow event. So the recommendation that came out of our consultant report was yes to look at some fast charging, but redundancy and expansion of your fleet, which is an interesting challenge in itself, the parking consideration, the capital investment, and then you end up with vehicles that maybe have more downtime than they need, except during an emergency, which is an interesting problem as well. So we haven't gotten a solution to that, but it's definitely something that came up when we were doing this work.
Thanks. Thanks, Kevin, Adam, and Emily. Next question is for Adam Smith. What has the service history been like over a number of years and kilometers, and what cost savings have been realized?
Bit early days right now from our perspective, because most of our EVs are still quite young and haven't gone through a full preventative maintenance cycle yet. But we are seeing, just to speak to the utilization, we are seeing quite strong and active participation in using the EVs. It was actually a little surprising, but just by the fact that it was an EV, people started to use it. I think maybe they were personally curious or whatnot, but certainly we've seen some very, very strong usage for these vehicles. Interestingly enough, EVs get a bit of a bad rap in winter, and certainly in Calgary, we're going through a fun winter right now. But some fun things to note about the EV experience so far is that they've been easier to manage in cold weather because we've had no start issues. The vehicles are always plugged in, just the way we have it right now. And these larger battery feeds, it's keeping the reliability up for our vehicles. Other than warranty, because most of them are still under manufacturer warranty, we've had basic operational stuff, windshield replacements, tire damage, and some cleanings related to our car share program. But anything else, it's still very early, but thus far has been fairly low from a qualitative point of view. Our Tesla has seen a lot of use, probably again because of curiosity to a degree, but for 5 months in 2022, over that period, we saw a really high usage of about 7,200 for a sedan in our environment. That's actually very high. Our Konas have been really good. We've got between 2 of them, we've got 10,000 plus again for about a half a year of data. Our Mach-E's are still relatively new, but usage is going up as more people return to the office in our neck of the woods following the pandemic. So yeah, good, but it's only qualitative at this point.
Thanks, Adam. I think I'm gonna jump to the next question because it's I think you kind of like cover it, but it's also towards you, but feel free everyone else to jump in. Advice to overcome resistance to technology change, and what are some strategies to reduce range anxiety for fleet operations?
Yeah, I think some of this was covered by some of the other panelists, but it really is a change management exercise, getting people used to the idea that technology is evolving. What we did in 1902 isn't necessarily relevant anymore in 2023. And putting this change in bite-sized chunks and just really recognizing that we have different levels of the organization with different things that people are interested in, different value characteristics, whatever you want to say it. So it really is about the fear of the unknown and managing that. For us, we recognize that fairly early, and we identified basically just that, a need for a change plan and a delivery vehicle with a kind of that pun intended to provide these bite-sized changes and de-risking it for our frontline operations. At the end of the day, we exist as a municipality to deliver service to the citizens. So we did this by, in our case, we did this through the creation of a corporate car share program. And what this does is it provides that avenue to bring in new technology into our fleet without any one specific business unit being saddled with something that may or may not work for their operation. And it gives them a bit of a try before you buy opportunity, but it's spread out across the entire corporation. It has been very successful thus far, and we are seeing that increased interest as I said, the workplace integration happens. In terms of range anxiety, this is still discussed very extensively at the procurement planning stages. And we have some, these vehicles that we do identify as electrification candidates. We do this very deliberately. We don't just say, oh yeah, we need to get 350 vehicles and just say, oh yeah, we're just going to go buy it. No, every vehicle replacement goes through the same process. Can we electrify it? Are you going to see the utilization? Is utilization going to be too high for the charging infrastructure that we have available for it, i.e. 24 hours a day, to some of the other panelists' point, some emergency requirements, all sorts of questions. It's kind of like a checklist as part of our acquisitions process. And when we spec that vehicle for that particular frontline operation, it is, like I said, it's done very strategically, deliberately to make sure that we have the right fit. If not, sometimes we make mistakes, then we do, because our fleet is big enough, we have the opportunity to move it around to a more appropriate operation with recognition to the constraint of we do have charging infrastructure limitations.
Thanks, Adam. The next question is very interesting, and I'm gonna ask it to Emily, but feel free to jump in, any of you. How did you initially get council on board to pay more to electrify fleet vehicles? And how do you recommend going about broaching the subject of the high upfront cost to the council in a year of an already large budget increase?
This is a loaded one. It's tough. So I think our experience was that the capital cost of the vehicles absolutely is a factor, and there's business cases available out there that show that the higher capital cost can be at least partially offset by longer term operating cost savings of an electric vehicle. Our challenge certainly was with capital cost of vehicles, but more importantly, it was the capital cost of charging. That was the barrier that we were looking at in practice. So you'd purchase a vehicle and you'd get the vehicle in, you'd find that there was a challenge with charging. So then you had to buy a charger, and then you'd find out that your electrical system for your building could only support it in one location. And so you had these unpredictable costs associated with charging on a vehicle by vehicle basis, which is why we took that step back. We knew that was a problem already when our council declared a climate emergency in 2019. So we knew we needed a plan. We needed a bigger picture to scale up that charging infrastructure, so it was easier to bring the vehicles on the typical renewal cycle for our fleets. So, big picture, the District of West Vancouver's project had 3 parts. The EV charging study for our district fleet, a real deep dive into what our fleet requirements would be over time, over a 20-year horizon. Getting investment in EV readying of our key facilities. So really looking at that electrical network that would need to support charging, where we would need to be able to access the power, and securing in that investment from council, kind of on the coattails of the climate emergency declaration. And then a first phase of install of fleet dedicated level 2 charging. So we weren't sharing with public anymore. We had really committed charging for our fleet user groups. So they had a reliable charging infrastructure for them. And now because that EV readying work is completed, we've taken away the unpredictable charging costs. The power behind the charger was actually, we never knew. Like it could be really easy, just the cost of a charger, or it could be, okay, we need a panel upgrade in order to put in another charge. Like that's big, especially in older municipal facilities, and that is an unknown. So through our project, we were able to plan in advance, remove some of those unknowns. And so now moving forward, we have more predictable costs. So we know the capital cost of the vehicle itself can be offset in some ways by the operating. And we know we will have fewer surprises with the charging infrastructure when the vehicles come in. I think I'll also flag that some of the co-benefits of doing this work in advance was we were able to demonstrate to our council that climate change adaptation is expensive. And so a lot of this work closely with our finance department helped to identify a funding need and justify a new environmental levy, which could be used in the future to supplement some of this important work that would need to happen if we want to achieve the climate action objectives that council has set out for us. And then moving forward, we can just kind of expedite those on the regular fleet renewal cycle based on all those criteria that Adam has just mentioned on a vehicle by vehicle basis, start to move that forward with council. We removed a huge barrier by looking at the charging and tackling that.
Thanks, Emily. I don't know if someone else want to jump in on this. It's a tough question.
I got a couple of comments. It's not really the Region Appeals experience, but you know, we're all in municipal government. It's always nice to see others' council reports and documents that led to resolutions. So I was forwarded the City of Mississauga's recent resolution, which is in the Region of Peel. They're one of our lower 2 municipalities. They recently got council approval to authorize and give the power to their, I believe it's their director of procurement, to go out and get EVs whenever they're available. Considering like it's so hard to get our hands on the vehicles these days, they didn't want to have to put together their 6-figure budget, go get council approval, and then order the electric vehicles. They were able to expedite that through getting council authority to do so. There's also something in there for transit buses. I forget how much, but check it out. It was a recent resolution. I'm sure you can find it with a Google search, or maybe we can distribute it after. I also know the City of Seattle, who's done some amazing stuff in terms of fleet electrification. They built in a cost per ton of carbon, I think it's $75, into their total cost of ownership to just overcome that increased capital cost for the vehicles themselves. And I think they might even have a percentage adder, like a tolerance. Like even if it's 10% more after doing that, we're still going EV because it's the way we got to do things moving forward. So that can probably be sourced from their electric vehicle strategy or something along those lines.
Thanks, Adam. Moving on to the, is that okay? Emily, do you have something else to add? No? Moving on to the next question, which I'm going to open for everyone. How to apply for grants for EVs and chargers with limited staff capacity? How long grant applications take to come through?
Yeah, so I've got experience with the grant application. So we applied to ZEVIP's, like Natural Resource Canada's Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program for public charging. We didn't actually apply for fleet charging. We applied in summer of 2021. We were unsuccessful, and they found money, and we might have been successful. we don't know. But you're looking at least 6 months from when you apply to, to knowing anything, which can certainly be a long time. What I would recommend is that, and someone says more than a year, so that's that's accurate. But what I would recommend for folks that have low resources, low capacity, is aggregate and partner with other municipalities and organizations in your region. It doesn't have to be a municipality or town. It can be the province or the utility or other large organizations that are interested in making the transition. There's also an opportunity through ZEVIP as well for a nonprofit or municipality to be a delivery agent. So we did partner with Fine Folks the Clean Foundation, again, another shout out to them, to assist them in submitting an application so they could be a delivery agent. And the delivery agent, what that program is there's no a minimum number of chargers that you apply for. I believe it's about 20. So they can administer funding, sort of one-offs to smaller municipalities that need it. And when it comes to fleet vehicles and getting rebates through that, it's typically just taken off the purchase price. So I don't think our team has actually filled out paperwork to get rebates for that. I think it just comes off the purchase price.
Right. A bunch of questions came for actually funding opportunities, and we'll be sharing links to opportunities for funding. And also at the end, we're going to share a couple of slides as well for more funding from FCM and GMF on that. Moving on to the next question.
Sorry, Desi, I actually had a couple things to add on that one.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So that 20 charger minimum under ZVIP, we ran into that as a region appeal. So we partner with our lower tier municipalities. Yes, to Kevin's point, if you can partner and get the project scope up to get the big distribution of funds, I'd say it's a greater likelihood of being approved. The third party providers, the delivery agents, usually a lot faster of an application process. So that can be really helpful. We also, for EVs, went through ISIP. What is it? Infrastructure Canada, and we went through the transit fund, and we got funding for a pilot project via that route. So I just wanted to add those things as well.
Thanks. No, thanks so much. Moving to the next question, which either Adam Smith or Adam Vai, you can jump in. Have you seen any successful partnership for bulk purchasing that have helped smaller towns purchase EVs? I'm guessing, I'm gonna open it, it's not just smaller towns, but regular bulk purchase. Have you seen that to work?
Do you want to go first, Adam, or
go ahead?
Go
okay,
for it.
I'll go first. Sure. We in Calgary, we haven't seen this take flight yet. We do have a couple of municipalities that are purchasing off our contracts. So our contracts go to market, and then they benefit from the pricing that we get. Doesn't always result in an EV purchase, however, because some of these smaller towns just aren't necessarily ready for that yet. But I know that is something that we are actively discussing with our biggest neighbor in Edmonton in various ways. We're still working out some of the contractual nuances, I guess, that because we're governed by public procurement laws that make it a little bit messy, or at least in our experience in Calgary. So from Calgary's perspective, nothing yet, but hopefully some to come.
Yeah, I didn't have too much to say on this one. I am familiar with, I think, US-based Sourcewell, who works with a Canadian version of that, Canoe procurement. And then they have provincial, it's LAS, and they have a partnership with Enterprise, like Rent a Car. And they'll go buy the cars and source the EVs for you at, I think, transparent pricing. I don't know a lot about the program, but that could be a way to leverage that group purchasing power.
We did touch base and provide some more information on this on the case studies that were released, specifically for Kingston case study, because they use it's a leasing model, but that's the way of like bulk purchase in Canada, I believe. So check it out. I think it's going to be shared in the link. Yeah, we have some more time, so we're gonna get the question, what is the best strategy to plan the charging station to support the electric vehicles? Kevin, would you like to jump on this one?
Yeah, for sure. So the best strategy that's worked for us in Halifax is get an inventory of every fleet vehicle that you have, determine where their home base typically is, and determine what is their operation throughout the day. How many kilometers, do they typically drive throughout the day? We found like our municipality is the size of PEI, and we found that throughout the course of a day, we could transition essentially every vehicle to fully electric, and the battery would cover that throughout the use of a day. What I think a lot of folks might not realize or think about is when you have a fleet depot, people are thinking, okay, great, I'm gonna have to dig into that fleet depot, increase the electrical infrastructure so that I can install charging. What we're doing in Halifax is we're actually finding a high voltage power pole, or just a power pole in general, that is near the parking lot. We're dropping a brand new service and we're installing charging off of that power pole. So we're not actually digging into the building at all, for a number of reasons. One, the buildings are probably 50, 60, 70 years old, and the electrical infrastructure is, probably 100 amp service. Two, a lot of the buildings are operated by potentially a third party, and the electricity costs, they do not want to be borne by that third party or the building itself, right? So by having a brand new meter, we're able to track the savings and the costs for charging the vehicles. I would say in locations where you potentially have emergency works vehicles, so vehicles that might have to run 24/7 in cases of emergency, you're going to need potentially 1 or 2 fast chargers that might have that need a diesel generator backup, whether or not you use it. And load management, I think, is really, really important as well. So even though we are going to, do a brand new service, we're not going to dig into the building at all for any of our depots. We are still going to employ load management for, a number of 9 to 5 vehicles that can trickle charge overnight. And we can, reduce our electrical infrastructure needs. Finally, we are running into issues. We lease a couple of fleet depots, and that is proving to be quite an issue. Some lessors are keen, and they support this kind of thing, but some it's been a bit more difficult. So we have a public charging infrastructure plan where we are strategically placing the public charging near some of these fleet depots as well. So we're going to look at 175 kilowatt fast chargers that should charge a vehicle up to 80% in about 20 minutes. And we're going to educate the fleet drivers as to where those chargers are, how often they typically need to charge per week, so that they have a full charge, and that would just, omit the need of installing charging at these leased facilities where, a future is quite unknown.
Thanks, Kevin. I don't know if someone else have something to add, Adam.
Yeah, that was a great overview. And to Kevin's point on all of the fleet vehicles being able to do their daily routes and duties on a single charge, like we found the same thing. These Ford F-150s and soon to be Rams, like they're all 405. I think the Rams like 500 miles or something it's claiming when it comes out. Like we actually found we could do a charge every third day. I don't know if we really looked into trying to keep it in between that 20 to 80% stated charge for optimal battery life, but it was like every third day. So we didn't need a charger per vehicle, I guess was our ultimate takeaway. I've been seeing a lot of different vendors out in the marketplace, mostly targeting transit agencies, offering up the services for a front end engineering and design study, feed study these days. But they're pretty much what Kevin was saying, step by step. And I guess you just have to to gauge like what is my fleet size and how much do I really need to invest in a study of this magnitude, because I'm sure it could get up to six figures if you really wanted to go all out. But like the steps for that were, yeah, determine like your vehicle routes and duty cycles, when they could charge. Talk to your local electric utility was number 2, which I was glad to see so early, and this is one proposed by a vendor. Then they like do a depot simulation tool where they basically they model all the energy infrastructure at your site, and then say like, here's your charging schedule and how you would use it for all of these vehicles in the future, making an energy twin of some sort. But the cool thing about this one is they can pinpoint where a microgrid makes sense. So say you have a capacity constraint, where's my battery backup and solar factor in? How would it be used? What is the size of that? But if you just like talk to vendors and be like, do you offer like front end engineering and design studies on a site by site basis? If it's a larger fleet and a bigger depot, it might be something worth investigating, because it should give you that plan along with the Class D cost estimates to inform the budget and a good understanding of what's going to be required should you go for full fleet electrification.
Thanks. Thanks so much. We have a few minutes left. I'm scrolling to the Q&A box, and Devanshi, feel free to jump in if you find any question that it's more that you thought that's interesting to ask. One that it's in, like, yeah, do you want to jump in? Sorry.
Sure. So there are a lot of questions around if someone has piloted an EV ambulance, fire engines, or emergency vehicles in general.
No, I think it would be great for people to do that. Our opinion in HRM is, let's get 5 light duty electric vehicles working flawlessly before we hop into, something like that.
We also have not piloted fire emergency response vehicles, but we have transitioned some of our fire light duty auxiliary support vehicles to EV. And they're really keen. So we'll see how that works. And as the technology evolves, some of those heavy duty vehicles, we don't have a lot of redundancy. It's a small municipality in our fleet. Vehicles cannot go wrong when we need them. We don't have a backup. So, and that's definitely the case with fire and those emergency response vehicles, to be really cautious and see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe time for one more question, Devanshi.
Yes. So there's a question around the grids, like provincial grids getting dirty. So what are your thoughts? Say, for example, Ontario is investing a lot in new natural gas plants. So what are your thoughts on fleet electrification if the grid is getting dirty?
I can touch on that. I just answered it in the chat, but I crunched the numbers on that. And right now, I believe we were at like a 97% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in gasoline versus our current electricity supply on the annual emissions factor. It's forecast according to IESO's 2022 annual planning outlook that we're going to head up to about 66 grams per kilowatt hour. Still a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. What can we do to mitigate? I don't know, keep advocating, show them that electric vehicles are distributed energy resources and not just draws on the grid, because I believe there's a lot of cost efficiencies that we can yield for the ratepayer should you use electric vehicles in a bi-directional manner.
Yeah, I'd say that Nova Scotia is the dirtiest grid in all of Canada, and I've run the numbers as well, and there's still less tailpipe emissions with an electric vehicle being charged on Nova Scotia Power's coal grid than than just a traditional gas engine, and largely due to the efficiencies, right? You're looking at 30% efficiency or something like that for a gas vehicle compared to 90% for an electric. But what I also say is, we are actively outfitting all of our fleet depots with solar, so that we can say we're doing even better. So that's our plan.
Great points.
Thanks so much. In the last minutes, I will just invite Kiana to take the word.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my camera here. Thanks so much to our presenters. That was great. Lots of questions in the chat. So while I wrap up, if you want to go to the Q&A and tackle any of the questions that were directed at you, feel free. I just wanted to highlight briefly that GMF also has funding opportunities for electrifying municipal fleets. One of the streams is reducing and avoiding fossil fuel use in municipal and transit fleets. So some of the things that we might fund are purchasing properly sized fleet options, alternative fuel infrastructure, fuel switching or reducing fuel consumption, and intelligent transportation. And sorry, my thing up. So we offer funding for studies, pilot projects, and capital projects. These come through grants and loans. Sharon shared some information in the chat where you could find more information on our website and also reach out to one of my colleagues, Noemi DeVoost. And Sharon, I might ask you to share that again. If you're looking to get in touch about funding opportunities through the Green Municipal Fund, that would be your first point of contact. So thank you for joining us today. Really great, and thanks again to our panelists. We do host a webinar. This was a panel a little bit out of the usual series, but we host a webinar on topics like this once a month. Our next webinar will be focused on the water sector and some of the emerging research that's come out and that we've been working on. So that will be on March 30th, same time, same place. Sharon is going to post the link in the chat for that if you would like to register. And we just want to finish up with a quick survey. There's about 7 questions. The first 5 are really quick about what you thought about the panel. But the last 2 are the ones that we'd like you to focus on. There's some questions about the challenges that you're facing in your municipality. And this is going to help us create some direction for the workshop that we're going to be hosting on this topic with Clean Air Partnership in April. So more details to come on that. So feel free to take some time to finish that poll. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.